Well, this is certainly a very special edition of Zilog and Moto because there is a surprise in store for today's review. In fact, if I was being smart, I probably should have held off on the surprise for episode 250, big landmark episode, but I really wanted to debut this as soon as possible. Now, what am I debuting? Well, that would be the newest addition to my hardware arsenal for working on the channel, the RetroTink 4K from Mike Chi. Now, this video isn't going to be all about the RetroTink 4K and what it can or can't do. It's been out for a while and there's plenty of videos out there about its capabilities and, how to get the most out of it. And to be perfectly honest, that sort of thing can be done by other channels far, far better than I can. So I'm going to leave that to them. I thought about doing a comparison video between the 4K and the 5X, which I had been using previously to do all the video capturing for the channel over the last 3.5 years or so, similar to what I had previously done by comparing the 5X and the FrameMeister. But again, I think that's probably best left to the tech channels that specialize in that sort of thing. Me, honestly, I just want to concentrate on the games themselves. So if you are curious and want to know more, I'd definitely recommend heading over to RetroRGB, My Life in Gaming, or Modern Vintage Gamer to see what you may or may not be missing out on. Now, I mention all this because you'll probably be able to notice a change in how today's captured footage looks, and it might not actually be what you think. Yes, the video for the channel is now captured in native 4K as opposed to being upscaled from 1080p to 4K, but I doubt many people will be able to notice that, if at all. No, instead today's video will look a bit different because I'm using some of the more advanced scanline and color profiles that the 4K supports that the 5X doesn't. Now, keep in mind the 5X does support scanlines, but it wasn't originally designed to do that. It was something that Mike ended up adding to the hardware in a firmware update along the line, and because of that and its resolution limitations, it's not quite as good as what the 4K can produce. I had experimented before with scanline captures back in episode 186, and while it did the seemingly impossible and make the Master System version of Pit Fighter look more palatable, I wasn't really happy with the results at the time. Now, with the 4K, I think I'm finally in on scanlines, at least virtual ones that don't require me to use some giant antiquated TV that really should be in a landfill somewhere. Yeah, I said it. Come at me. Anyway, I'm happy enough with the results to keep these videos going with that, but I'm going to leave it up to you out there if I should keep going with the scanline version of the video captures or go back to just doing regular video captures. So let me know in the comments down below what you think and if they're an improvement or if I should just leave well enough alone and stick with what's gotten us by so far. Now, if you're new to the channel and this is your first time here, you might be wondering why I've spent the entire intro so far talking about a scaler instead of the game mentioned in the title. And, well, if you'd actually played the game yourself, you might understand why I'm choosing to talk about other things. But just to be clear about what's going on around here, hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis, either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Having said that, we've spent far too much time not discussing this week's game, Goofy's Hysterical History Tour for the Genesis, so let's get right to it. But first, our traditional look at the package. And here's my copy of Goofy's Hysterical History Tour. I'm not sure how long I've had this one. It's definitely been sitting around for a while, waiting on its chance. This particular copy is in really nice condition, minus some surface marks that are on the back of the box. The hang tab is intact at the top, and the inner cover looks perfect, with no signs of sun bleaching, water damage, or edge wear. The manual, as we'll get to in a minute, looks barely read, which sometimes is simply a nice thing to have, and then other times means that the game wasn't very good, and this copy did a lot of sitting on the shelf over the last 30 years. So I guess we'll just have to see where this lands. This is not a super common game as it's a later release for the Genesis, and it only came out in North America, so if you happen to want one for yourself, expect to pay between $30 and $40 for a complete copy, depending on condition. Since this was a North American exclusive, this is the only cover art available for this game, and this is a title where not only is this a regional exclusive, it is also a console exclusive. So there's no versions of the game for, say, the Super Nintendo or the Game Gear out there floating around. That means that this cover is all there is for the game, and in this case, I think that's okay because the art is pretty nice. There's the somewhat unique title logo in the upper left-hand corner, and then down below is Goofy and his trusty extendo hand riding on a stone wheel on a dinosaur, while in the back, Pirate Pete is trying to chase him down, and a Wild West and medieval scene is shown as well. This all alludes to the game pretty directly because each of these relates to one of the 4 historical worlds that you'll explore with Goofy, assuming you have the patience to get there, but more on that in a bit. Flipping over the back, and each of those 4 worlds is shown off with a good quality screenshot with a caption on a white background. And as a tagline at the top, we get Goofy's iconic catchphrase, "Gorsh," which you definitely will be hearing a time or two while playing the game. Now, if it were any other game and character, I'd probably think that maybe a better tagline could have been used, but considering it's a game about Goofy, that's pretty on brand. The rest of the back is pretty eloquent retelling of the game's backstory and what you'll be doing in-game, and I definitely can't complain about any of that. I suppose some people might think that it's a bit wordy and maybe want some bullet points or something like that, but I really can't complain about this presentation at all. Well, at least until we get to the manual, that is. Opening up the box, and the cartridge and manual are in great shape. Near mint when it comes to the manual itself, and as it looks like it's probably never been read. Before opening it up, on the back there's an ad for another Genesis game, which was pretty common at the time, but in this case it's for a game that never existed in Home Improvement, based on the Tim Allen sitcom. Of course, that game was released for the Super Nintendo, and from what I've heard, Genesis owners probably dodged a bullet here, but it's still interesting to see from a historical perspective. Moving on, the inside of the manual is impressive. Actually, a bit too impressive. There is a lot of words here. Like, a lot. So, while I say I really can't complain about the presentation, I do think that maybe this could have been edited down a bit while keeping all of the great pictures, and instead perhaps having some better breakdowns of each of the individual levels. But that's just me. Okay, that's the package. Let's see if we can help Goofy keep his job and defeat a multiverse of Petes. Before getting into the review, a brief Disney history lesson when it comes to Goofy in the 90s. Goofy, of course, was a long-standing character in the Disney catalog, technically going all the way back to 1932, although that version of the character would be renamed in 1934 from Dippy Dog to Goofy, marking his first appearance by that name. Although from the 60s to the early 90s, he fell to the side a bit and wasn't featured in nearly as much current content at the time. That changed with the advent of the wildly popular half-hour cartoon Goof Troop, which debuted in 1992 and ran in syndication until 1996 as part of the Disney Afternoon, which followed in the footsteps of other Disney Afternoon shows like DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. In fact, the cartoon was so popular that it led into not only 1, but 2 movies released in 1995 and 2000 respectively, following on the further adventures of Goofy, his son Max, and then rival/neighbor Pete and Pete's son PJ. So having said that, with Goofy having a bit of a renaissance as a character in the mid-90s, you would expect any video game released featuring him to probably have some sort of tie-in to the TV show, right? Well, technically there was one of those released, in the form of Disney's Goof Troop exclusively for the Super Nintendo. This Goof Troop was a Capcom release, and since Capcom was still exclusively working with Nintendo until the release of Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition later that year, Sega was denied a Goofy game. But Sega and Disney fans wouldn't be goofless for too long, and on September 28, 1993, Absolute Entertainment stepped up to the plate and released Goofy's Hysterical History Tour. Capcom still had the rights to the Goof Troop specific license and those versions of the characters, so instead this game focuses more on the classic representations of Goofy and Pete, and also has brief guest appearances from other classic Disney characters as well, none more important than Ludwig von Drake, Donald Duck's uncle and proprietor of the history museum that Goofy is currently working at, which provides the setup for the plot of the game. That plot is fully explained on page 7 and 8 of the manual, but if you don't have said manual, not to worry because the game will spell out that plot with one of the longest static screen cutscenes I think I've ever witnessed in a video game. Seriously, by my count it was 4 minutes and 40 seconds, give or take a few, between the opening scene starting and then starting gameplay in the first level. Now, I don't mind storytelling in my video games. I mean, hell, I'm used to Yakuza having scenes that go on for so long that my controller will disconnect due to inactivity. But even by those terms, this seemed a bit excessive. Usually I try to include all the intro footage in the captured footage segment to give viewers an idea of what it was like when players first boot up the game, but I'm not going to do that here because it would probably be half the segment otherwise. To sum up the goings-on, Goofy is a hard-working custodian at Ludwig von Drake's History Museum. But as you might imagine, Goofy, well, has a tendency to goof things up, and he's not exactly the best employee. To make matters worse, Goofy's chief rival, Pete, is also working as a custodian at the History Museum and has been conveniently letting Ludwig know every time that Goofy goofs up, in an attempt to get Goofy fired. Oh, that evil, conniving Pete, what a rascal. Anyway, things are coming to a head as the museum has a big opening coming up the next day that everyone needs to prepare for. Goofy, wanting to prove his worth, invents a new tool called the Extendo Hand and shows it off to Ludwig, saying that it'll help him get everything done before the museum opens. Ludwig is impressed and gives Goofy a deal, in that if Goofy is successful with cleaning everything up, he'll be promoted to head janitor, above Pete. But if the museum isn't ready, he'll have to let him go. Of course, while this is going on, Pete is listening in the background, and he knows that now is his time to really sabotage Goofy and get rid of him for good. So he starts going to the different exhibits and switching things around. And it's up to Goofy to not just get everything clean, but also make sure that each exhibit has all of the correct items. Okay, so that might have been a bit long for a sum up, but now maybe you understand why the intro is so long. Having said all that, you might think the game is based around Goofy cleaning each of the exhibits and putting right what Pete has mixed up. Well, as interesting as a game as that sounds, that's not quite it. No, basically Goofy goes to clean the first exhibit, knocks himself silly, and the rest of the game is a fever dream, turning the game into a platformer. Dream or no dream though, Goofy still has his trusty Extendo Hand to help him make his way through the area and fight off versions of Pete that are inspired by the various exhibits, along with other enemies from those historical eras. At least, that's what the manual and packaging tell me. You see, in about 6 hours of playing the game, I was never able to make it past the first boss. So, if you're wondering why all the footage included was of the prehistoric era section, that's why. The medieval, pirate, and Old West areas certainly look cool, but seeing as how I never made it to any of them, I just have to assume. There is technically a cheat code that allows you to have a level select option added to the option screen, and I thought about using it to show off some of the other parts of the game, but I wanted to emphasize how difficult the game was, and it didn't seem right to show off something that I couldn't make it to on my own. And I want to remind everyone that this is a Disney game aimed at kids. So, what's going on here? Why is the game so difficult? Is this just a situation where I need to spend more time in getting good and need to stop whining? Well, I'll admit, I'm certainly not the best gamer out there, but I would think that with the game being in a normal difficulty, 6 hours should be enough time for me to get past the first area. However, the game, at very least in this first prehistoric era, has some pretty large design flaws, and I have no reason to think that the later worlds would be any different. But I suppose it is possible that this is one of those games where it actually gets easier the further you get.
As mentioned, Goofy starts out with his extendo hand tool, and the bulk of the game is based around the usage of that tool, either as an offensive weapon or as a tool that's used by Goofy to reach faraway items or grab onto blocks, allowing him to either swing side to side or climb upwards onto said block. That grabbing mechanic is crucial because as a platformer, you're going to spend lots of time climbing and jumping to other platforms and blocks. The timing and positioning on using it is slightly awkward, as there's plenty of times when you need to be very precise with your positioning to grab onto something, and of course if you slightly miss it, you'll fall down and have to start over, at best. I say at best because falling in this game is a complete crapshoot. Frequently when moving around, all you can see are the platforms that are around you, but nothing below you. Because of the positioning of the camera, and because, unlike other platformers, you can't make Goofy look around, so he has no way to scroll the screen down to see what might be below him. Unlike most other platformers that I've played, in many places, rather than just having the occasional pit here and there, the level ends up being one giant pit, meaning that if you miss a jump or a grab, or trying to simply go down from a platform below you and misjudge where to drop down at, well, then it's time to restart the level from the beginning, as none of the levels have checkpoints. I actually think I got pretty close to making it to the first Pete boss, but as I was making my way through that level, I got to a point where now, rather than having to worry about what pits that I can't see might be below me, I was now in an area where I was completely blind, because the next platform that I needed to grab was off screen to the right. And guess what you can't do when you can't see the next platform you need to jump to? That's right, you can't judge how far you need to jump. And since the extendo hand has to latch exactly onto that next platform to grab it, well, that was when I threw in the towel. I could deal with needing to make jumps and be accurate and not fall down, to an extent, but now there's jumps that you can't even see to judge until you're already in the air. I don't know what masochistic person designed these levels, but I really hope I never see any of their work again, because this is brutal. Technically, the game does feature 3 difficulty levels, and most of the time that I was trying to play the game was on normal. However, just because I figured I'd try the game on easy, to see if maybe, just maybe, that I could get to that second area, even though it wasn't easy. Since my issues with the difficulty weren't related to the enemies, I didn't have high hopes, but I figured it would be a good test just for completion's sake. Oh, and I should probably mention that as nice and detailed as the manual is, nowhere in there does it mention exactly what changes between the different difficulty levels, just that it's an option. Well, I found out. There's basics like that Goofy starts out with more health than easy, and that enemies take fewer hits to defeat. About what you would expect. However, more importantly, the game is shorter, and the second part of the prehistoric era, which the manual refers to as the primeval forest, is completely skipped. Now, I'm not a fan of games cutting content or endings for difficulty reasons, so that's already a bit troublesome. But it did allow me to get to the first instance of Pete as a boss fight, and even in easy, I still did not beat him. For some reason, even though the game was in easy, I want to reinforce that, I hit Pete at least 20 times, and he still didn't go down. This wasn't the last time I tried playing the game for the review, but it was the point when I completely gave up on it, because if Pete was going to require that many hits on easy, what in the blue hell was normal going to be like? Assuming that I could even make enough blind jumps to get that far. Those aren't the only odd design choices that the game has. Frequently, as you make your way through the levels, Goofy can find power-ups that he can use to hopefully make things easier against the enemies. You know, pretty standard platformer stuff, right? Well, one of the things that he can collect is called goof balls, which can be thrown at enemies. However, you don't have to throw them at enemies. You can also find goofball funnels in the level, which allow you to deposit the goofballs that you found in them in exchange for points at the end of the level, assuming that you beat it that go-round. You want to do this because each goofball collected and deposited will get you 1,000 points, and you get extra lives every 50,000. An interesting concept in that you get rewarded for conserving ammo and exploring, But you have to deposit each goofball one at a time, and you have to wait for it to fully roll down the funnel. Essentially, you have to wait about 5 seconds per goofball, so if you're dropping off 20 goofballs, you'll be sitting there for about a minute, and you have to deposit them one at a time, so basically it's press down, wait 5 seconds for the ball to roll in, press down again, wait again, you get the idea. Then at the end of the level, you also have to wait while each of the balls is counted up individually. Original? Sure. Fun? No, not really. The graphics in-game are pretty solid. Those intro cutscenes are all drawn well, almost like something from a comic page. And then once you get into the levels, the backgrounds, enemies, and Goofy himself all have a very Disney appearance. Goofy is also animated well. Not Aladdin or Castle of Illusion well, but still pretty good and again cartoonish. I think my main complaint is that the backgrounds are somewhat plain, and there's no parallax scrolling going on or any other really advanced effect that you might have seen in other platformers at the time. The music, on the other hand, well, it's disappointing at best. The synths used in creating the tracks aren't very interesting at all, and even then, the music itself is pretty bland. I wouldn't specifically call it bad, but it definitely comes right up to that line. Now, I'm not going to call it the composer by name, but he actually has music credits on quite a number of titles, so I'm a little surprised that it doesn't sound any better, because the experience was clearly there. I suppose at least that Goofy's "Gorsh" sound effect sounds decent, which is good because you're going to be hearing it a lot as you play through the game. Goofy's Hysterical History Tour is nothing if not frustrating. I think the actual idea behind the game and the clear care that the designers took with telling the story and the creation of the packaging and the manual is all solid, and there's definitely far worse examples out there. Unfortunately, the game is simply hamstrung by the level design and other odd choices, and sails way over the line of being just challenging enough to be interesting. There's plenty of bad games that I reviewed on Zilog and Moto with good stories and concepts, and this is just another one, proving that usually it's a lot easier to have a good idea for a game than to actually execute creating it. As a result, I'm giving Goofy's Hysterical History Tour 1 star. Platformer and Disney fans that have access to save states might want to give this one a shot, but everyone else can skip this tour.
Okay, and that is it for Goofy's Hysterical History Tour. This is definitely one of those games where for the first hour I was very much into it, and I really wanted to see where Absolute was going to go with things. After the next hour I was clearly questioning my abilities, but I thought that there might still be something redeemable in here, and I just needed to keep digging. Well, maybe some platformer fan out there with more patience than free time than me might be willing to keep excavating to get to the bottom of the game, but I've got better things to do. It's too bad because on some drawing board out there, this was a good game, it just couldn't make it from paper to programming. Now, next time on Zilog and Moto, I think we're going to swing back to the light. Still on the Genesis, it's a game that I've never played before. And it's actually somewhat hard to find and in demand. I think I ended up breaking down and just getting it on eBay when I could never find it locally. It's the direct sequel to a game that I gave 4 stars to previously, and if it's anywhere near as good as that title, it's got a chance to be the best game that I review on the channel all year. So here's hoping that it's more Cesar Romero than Jared Leto for your far too obvious hint. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 248. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. And remember, let me know down in the comments below if you prefer the RetroTink 4K footage with the scan lines, or if I should go back to the standard unfiltered captures. Later!